Hi, today we're going to talk about the recommended steps for completing a needs assessment to better understand how your school can serve the students, staff, parents, and general community at any given time. My name is Tricia Blum, and I'm the Vice President of Business Consulting Services at Charter School Capital. Prior to joining Charter School Capital, I was the interim CEO of a 5-campus charter school, and we spent a lot of time talking about the different communities that our schools were in and how we could best serve each individual community. And we created a, if you will, a needs assessment framework. And today I'm going to speak in general about that. Each school leader, and each community has a slightly different desire, need, want, approach. So I'm going to tell you the 3 recommended steps, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about pitfalls involved in that. So in step 1 of creating a needs assessment, you really want to identify and engage the appropriate stakeholders. Number 2, you want to identify the relevant data that you want to measure so that you make sure that not only are you talking to the right stakeholders, but that you're asking the right questions so you can get the right information. And then 3rd, you want to do some resource mapping. You want to figure out where your resources are and how you can use them and at what time you would want to use them. So when I say the word need assessment, what does a needs assessment even mean? And I'm going to say today, as part of our definition, we're going to say it is a systematic approach to determining what your community needs and who your community is. So I'm going to say in general, your community is your students, their families, their loved adults, the community that's immediately surrounding your school if you're a brick and mortar school, farther out probably if you are a distance learning school, and then as far out as you come. Some schools we work with, they service students that drive 30 or 40 minutes to get to school. Some schools are really close to what we would think of as a traditional neighborhood school. So you want to determine what your community is in terms of, I'm holding my hands and I'm kind of pulling the rings out from the school. You want to determine where the rings of the community are that you need to make sure you're servicing in your area. So I've said students, not just parents, but loved guardians, adults in students' lives, immediate community members. I would also say your staff, your school leadership, and of course your board. I would also throw in your authorizers. Those are your stakeholders really in your school. And anytime you're trying to make a determination of what it is you're trying, what it is you're doing, you're going to want to consult all of those. And so you're really going to use this when you are talking about a couple of different things. 1, growth. We've spent some time in other videos talking about growth and going at it in a systematic way. And so the needs assessment will be part of that, right? We've talked about, should I grow or should I not? And we are talking about some of the stakeholders you should be including in that decision-making process and making sure that you're servicing those stakeholders. Additionally, once we're not just talking about a needs assessment in terms of growth, but also your why. Again, we've talked about your why in other videos. Your why is your mission statement, your values. And sometimes, as we've talked about in other videos, a school moves away from its initial why for many different reasons. And sometimes that doesn't serve the school community particularly well. And other times it serves it exceptionally well. And so you want to be intentional about determining whether you're still working on the why that was in your initial charter or in the current time. So those are a couple of reasons why you would be doing a needs assessment. There are many others, but programming, growth, and your why or your mission are reasons you would be doing this. So I say that specifically because we've talked about who the stakeholders are. And of course, you might add other stakeholders. If you are a STEM school that's working directly with a university in your area, the university would be part of those stakeholders. So you determine who really are your stakeholders. I would recommend in anything that you do that you include your board and your authorizer in addition to whatever community stakeholders you have. And then there's also the resource mapping, right? And that's the part where you are determining which stakeholders can do what to help it effectuate whatever it is you're trying to do, whether that is to change your why, it's to grow, those are the reasons you're going to use resource mapping, because you want to be really systematic about determining who's responsible for what. And so those are the steps you're going to take. And I want to talk specifically about some pitfalls, because I think just about anyone can look and go, okay, I got to determine stakeholders. I got to figure out what it is I'm really trying to determine. And I have to figure out who at the school can actually help do it all, right? But the reality is there are pitfalls. And once you live through the pitfalls, you'll never forget them. And so I'm hoping to actually prevent you from having to live through some of those pitfalls. And so I've jotted down some notes. And one of my biggest pitfalls is not casting a wide enough net in your community. So often when we are talking about stakeholders, we forget, the authorizer over here, or our board members, right? The board members are the bottom line responsible for the effective running of the school. But so often the school leadership on a day-to-day basis are the ones that are just making it all happen. And we forget to bring in our board members at a very early stage. And we really want them to be part of it at a very early stage. So we want to make sure that we're casting a wide enough net, right? If you're a school community that has a lot of grandparents involved, as well as parents or loving adults, you want to make sure that you're including them. So make sure that you're casting a wide enough net when you are talking about identifying and engaging your stakeholders. Students are incredible, right? It's always important to make sure that whatever you're doing, if you could bring a student into that, you don't want to bore them with the really arcane details of some of this, but in general, they so often, because they really do have a stake in the game, they really have some interesting insight. So make sure you're casting a wide enough net. All right, so we've just talked about the pitfall of not casting a wide enough net. Another pitfall that can easily occur is negating or not listening to the snippets of information and thoughts that people are sharing with you in those times that are not formally set up. For example, as you are a school leader standing out at school drop-off or pickup in the morning or afternoon, and as the loving guardian drives by to pick up their kid, kind of hollers something out at the window of the car to you, or, one of the volunteers on the playground mentions something to you, or one of the staff members in the hallway says something. It's really easy when we're hearing all of that noise on any given day to forget or negate those statements. And we should really be keeping track of them along with what's being said on social media. We don't always have to agree, but we should be paying attention to that and not negating that, because I think that's really an important part. If your stakeholders are saying something different than you are trying to effectuate, again, it doesn't match. You need to make sure it matches the same way that your why matches your teaching program. Another pitfall that you might fall into is not having a deep understanding of the emotional part of whatever change you're trying to effectuate. Again, stakeholders have their opinions and they're sometimes sharing them with you, but they're not always sharing their own personal why or their emotional reason for either liking the ideas that you're trying to move forward or disliking them. So it's really important to be, looking into the emotional part or get a deep understanding. So maybe if emotional is too squishy of a word for you, certainly a bigger, broader understanding of what your general community is saying or your stakeholders. I think another pitfall, and I've only got a couple more, I promise I won't keep you too long, is not understanding the social structure of your stakeholders. It's really a bummer if you're working with one group of stakeholders, but it turns out that they are not actually, what's leading the charge, if you will. It's really important to understand the social structure and how things work with your stakeholders. For example, this is an easy example and we can pick on it all day long. You have your authorizer. They actually may have an actual ability to veto or approve whatever it is you're trying to effectuate. So if you are not paying attention to what your authorizer is saying, there may be some surprise when you go to get their vote of approval. In the same token, your authorizer may not actually have the ability to approve or disapprove what it is you're trying to change, but you want to include them. You also want to make sure that your PTA, PTO program, if you've got one of those, and your loving parents and your own school board are approving what it is you're doing. So again, understanding your social structure, how it works and how it works together. I think another pitfall is understanding your general population. You serve a group of stakeholders, and in some situations, a large group of them come and go, a transient population. I recently worked with a school that did an exceptional job of identifying their stakeholders and making sure they were asking the right questions and getting the right information. But they didn't do a good job of paying attention to a class of military personnel leaving after they'd been at the school. Their students had been at the school for a couple of years. And so it was like 10% of the school population left over the summer. So they had to start all over again. And so that one might be a subset of understanding social structure, but it's a great example, I think, until I supported the school that this went through, I never really thought of it in those terms. So remember, this conversation started with recommended steps for completing a needs assessment. Remember, we talked about identifying your stakeholders, casting a wide enough net, identifying the information that you're trying to get from those stakeholders, making sure that it actually matches what it is that you're trying, your end goal is. And then resource mapping, making sure that all of your stakeholders and can all work together in a way that best serves your school. It doesn't mean that you have to bring every stakeholder in, but so that you're representing those groups. We talked about pitfalls, not casting a wide enough net. I've said that twice now. Negating thoughts or statements from people that you hear on the fly or social media. And then we've talked about resource mapping and not including the appropriate stakeholders in the planning process, and making sure that you are clear on whose role is what and when. So those are some great ideas, I hope, in helping you as you get ready to make whatever changes it is to your organization, whether it's growth or changing your why, or maybe changing your academic or curriculum. There are lots of reasons that you would want to make sure that you are assessing the needs of your stakeholders. Please share any of the real life examples and challenges, pitfalls that you've come across at any point. Love to hear them. Thanks so much.